Hello, this is a check-in for Harriet the Spy. I realized I haven't talked about it, and we've really gotten into, I guess, part two. It's the heart of the book. It is chapters 9 to chapters 14. Um, you know, Starting out with a chapter where Harriet actually spends some time with her parents. There's been this Christmas pageant thing where she's going to be an onion and she's rolling around and in her room banging, crashing, because that's Harriet. She's a banger and a crasher. And the parents come in and they actually kind of have a moment where they feel like a family, where they're practicing being an onion with her, and it's kind of sweet. And then in the middle of it, she picks up her notebook and starts writing in the notebook. And when she completely forgets about her parents, and when she looks up again, the parents are kind of looking at her strangely. It's like, do you do that all the time? And it's one of these things where you kind of realize, it's like, wow, these parents have really been detached from Harriet, because they didn't notice, they didn't know that she was an obsessive, she had, like, for the last 3 years been an obsessive note taker. um they didn't realize that, which is, and it's also one of these things of like, okay, here's Harriet in the middle of probably what you would look back on as an adult and say, hey, that was like a memory of being with my family, being with my parents. But in the middle of that, she stopped and she grabbed her notebook and started writing. It's like, interfering. That kind of, there's importance of recording an experience, and then there's a importance of getting so caught up in it that you lose the experience, which, I don't know. I guess as a writer, as a obsessive videographer, I can relate to that, and sometimes fall into that. So it's just like an interesting little scene there at the beginning. Also, during she goes on her spy route and she gets into the dumbwaiter to spy on the rich, bedridden woman who is crying because the doctors actually says she actually has to stay in bed, and it's, Harriet's like, oh, it's one of these things of like, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. Um, but the other thing that happens is the woman's like, suddenly goes, "What's that scratching noise? Is there rats in that dumbwaiter?" It's like, it's Harriet scratching away at her note thing. They yank it open, they catch her, and the maid kind of basically grabs her by her hoodie, kind of hauls her, tosses her out, and says, "Don't get caught," and winks at her. So it's sort of like, you're kind of this harmless little nuisance, but she's like terrified. It's the first time in three years of spying that she's gotten caught. And she runs home as fast as she can. But it's like, oh, okay, well, that's maybe kind of what's going to be happening. And indeed, she has a nightmare that night, and has a sense of like, oh no, something terrible is going to happen. Something always terrible happens when I have a nightmare, which is when we get into chapter 10, where what I consider sort of the event of this novel actually takes place. It's not an inciting incident. It is kind of a part of the climax of the book, actually. In that next day, she's at school, and they're playing tag, and she that people are knocking books, or not even tag. It's a game like where they're knocking books out of each other's hands, and so they knock out some of her books, and then she runs away and runs off, and she's chased by Sport and I can't remember who the other girl is. But they're running around, and suddenly she's like, oh, and they're picking up books, and suddenly she realizes she doesn't have her notebook, and it's like, crap, it was one of the first books that got knocked away. They come back, and all the kids are there, and they're all sitting around. And is it Janie? Janie is reading it. I can't remember. And it's like it says like, Sport, come over here. We have stuff, and they've been reading out selections of the book of Harriet's notebook, and they've been reading out the terrible, cutting, brutal things that Harriet has been writing down in her notebook. Maybe true things. Maybe that's what makes them the most hurtful of all. Said, written down without care for anyone's feelings. Maybe some of Harriet being kind of an angry kind of person, a way of her venting out all this stuff onto the page. um, and they read it out, and they are, it's like, we're gonna have to decide what to do to you. And Harriet sits on the park bench, and then she goes, I don't have to sit here. I don't have to accept this. So she just walks off and goes home. And yeah, and yeah. So the kid and next day, she's basically none of them are talking to her. They're basically ostracizing her. After school, they all go off, and and they're jostling her, and they all go off to I think it's Rachel Hennessy's house, whose mother makes good cake, which Harriet has written in her book is the only reason why anyone hangs out with her, is because her mom makes wonderful cakes. Um, and they go to her place, and they're building something in the backyard, and they're getting a flagpole, and she has no idea what's going on there, and it's like she just, it's like, screw them, and she goes home. It's like, she's very like, I don't need them. I'm and she's like, and she gets to school again, another next day or another day, and it's like, continuing, they're ostracizing, jostling her, and she's like, she writes her name in the book. It's like, Harriet M. Welsh, that's who I am, you know and they can't take that away from me. At which point Rachel Hennessy dumps an ink bottle, all over her desk, all over her, and the flood of ink spreads across the page of the notebook and blots out her name, and she is literally an ink-stained wretch, spraying ink everywhere, and all the kids are pretending in front of the teachers, oh, we're so sorry, we're so sorry, and meanwhile, like, behind the back, she just kind of sticks out her tongue, and she just whacks her in the face and leaves a big ink splat on her, on the girl that stuck out her tongue. And it's like, and the teacher turns back around, of course clueless, of course not knowing. It's like, oh, you shouldn't blame your troubles on other kids and stuff like that. Which in some ways there is a truth in this. If she has brought this upon herself. It's also interesting when they read stuff out, when it kills the people. I mean, Sport is incredibly hurt by what she writes in the book of, like, her father, him basically having to take care of his father, and that he's poor, and that he's that he likes cookbooks, he likes unmasculine things. I don't know if it's here, I think it's later when she's talking about revenge. She says, like, call Sport a sissy. It's like, there's kind of a thing here of him it's like, you're not a masculine boy. You're perhaps, maybe Sport is gay. Who knows? But it's definitely using those kind of slurs and stuff like that against her friend, really, really, really wounding him, and really wounding and angering the other kids, because she's perceptive little fucker who knows all of their secrets. It's it's the kind of stuff that we, I think they say, like, sometime later, it was like with Rachel Hennessy, it was like, oh, people only like her for her cakes, and there's a dead silence. Oh, because she sends an anonymous note saying they only hang out with her because they like your cakes and things like that, and there's a dead silence when it's revealed to the kids, and they're like, and Picky Whitehead, who is kind of a gormless, clueless kid, totally identify with Pinky, he says, like, well, she does make pretty good cakes. It's like he always says the wrong thing. It's like, oh, that actually is, it hurts, because there is truth there. She is speaking truth. She's speaking really, really unfiltered, nasty truth, but she is speaking truth. You know, Harriet is like, I can't do my spy thing anymore. She goes home, she starts writing her memories, and it's interesting that one of her first memories is her her first memory is standing in her crib, looking out over the park and screaming with rage. It's like, that's Harriet. She's like, that's her personality. That is her, is like standing up in her crib, looking out at the park and screaming with rage. It's like, I want to get out, or I want to, like, that's her kind of her attitude to the world is this infant standing in a crib screaming with rage looking out. I think that's just brilliant on Fitzhugh's part of just that, like, that is that character kind of summed up in her first memory. She becomes more and more obsessed with the notebook. That's all she's doing. She's only writing in it. Even at school, that's all she does. She's completely ignoring her schoolwork. At home, that's all she's doing. And because she goes completely overboard in that, they take away her notebook when she's at school. She has to surrender it to the cook or mother before she goes to school, and she only gets it when she comes back from school again. And she finds this really difficult. It's like she can't think anymore. Everything turns to morass, and it's like I feel different. I feel mean, which is like, oh, this book was a repository in some ways for being able to, like, write stuff out versus do stuff, which is what indeed happens. She goes home and she writes a revenge list. The first item on there is put a frog in one of the girls' desks, which she goes and she gets a frog, which she actually kind of quite likes, and she hopes it's going to be okay in the ensuing chaos because she puts it in the desk. And the girl opens, and what she does, she throws something at a girl, like, just, mean stuff. And before this, when she said she felt mean, she stuck out her foot. Pinky Whitehead, of course, Pinky Whitehead comes along, trips, mashes his nose, his blood coming out of his nose. She just gets up and walks home. I don't care. She walks over his writhing body. It's like, she's gone completely kind of cold and rage filled, and is now acting out. And then, yeah, the next day does the thing with the frog, which causes complete chaos, and she's throwing things at people. And she just leaves again, and she just doesn't go back to school. She's just at home, in what's like, super deep depression state. She's not reading. She's not even writing in her notebook anymore. She's just lying in her bed staring at the ceiling. She's having that dark, dark, dark time. And in the midst of this, it's kind of hilarious because she hears her father come home and says, "Oh, you can tell it's the '60s because it's like, oh, I just want to come home to peace and quiet and have my martini." It's like, this is definitely, we're in the '60s. Dads just want to have their martinis and be left alone. But because of this, and she is, she's basically, she's like, she comes down. It's like, those are the same clothes you wore yesterday. Go put on new clothes. No. It's like, you're going to go do that. No. It's like, like, go wash your face. No. It's like, you're going to do this or you're going to get spanked. And she gets up and she goes and does it. But it's like, everything is just like, no. So they take her to Dr. Wagner, a red-headed, bald, but with bright red hair, funny nose, big teeth, child psychologist is obviously what he is. And they play a game. They play Monopoly. She's like, "You play games all day?" It's like, "Well, don't you play games?" "Yeah, but I'm 11. It's like, "Well, you play one game with me?" And she's like, starts to feel sorry for him. So sure, they take out a game. He brings out his notebook and it's like, "What kind of notes are you taking?" "What do you mean?" "Well, are you taking notes or mean notes?" It's like, because mean notes are hard to get away with nowadays. Obviously talking about her own issues, which thankfully, yeah, her parents do know. It's like, well, it's not nice to be writing mean things about people. "Well, they shouldn't have read my thing. It was my private thing." It's like, yeah, but wouldn't that make you feel horrible if you like, they try and kind of explain to her why there might be a justification why people are so angry at her, which she does get and she doesn't get, because it's like, it's her notebook. It's like, they shouldn't have looked at my notebook. It's private. And so, yes, she's with Dr. Wagner, and he's writing notes, and it's like, he keeps on losing games. It's, "Well, you're losing games because you're paying attention to the notebook. You're not playing the game." It's like, "Well, how about I give you a notebook and we both have our notebook." So she he gets a notebook, with a very nice notebook with a nice pen. It's like, oh, she likes that, and it's like so they do that, and it's like, it's interesting because it's like, yeah, it's me notes, and it's like, hey, if you're taking notes all the time, you can't be good at the game. It's like, this might be a little subtle lesson that Dr. Wagner is trying to get across here. Um, she decides she actually wants to see if she could be friends with Janie and Sport, like if she can talk to them privately and maybe apologize to them and stuff like that. There's a bit of remorse thing going on there. She goes to Janie, who she surprises, who spills some kind of acidic thing all over the floor. That does not go well. She it's like, you know, she has to leave. She goes to Sport, Sport, whose father, who, is a nice man. She's like a nice man. He's running around all super happy because he sold it. He sold it. He sold his book. They're going to give him money for it. He's got a check. Um, very hand-to-mouth life. And Sport's just like, why are you here? Because he was smiling, and then it's like, oh, why are you here? And a part of this is like, when Sport sees her, it's like he's been hit. It's like you feel exactly how much pain her words have caused him, and it makes me think, it's like, are there some things just so unforgivable that you say that there's no way that it can be taken back, and that it just can't be forgiven? Like, has she destroyed that? And I mean, is that the risk you run, giving unfettered expression to your thoughts? And I mean, though that's sort of something that writers do, not unfettered, but they the thing of being a writer is sharing with other people your internal life, but sometimes that's not the most pleasant stuff. It's not the happiest stuff. Maybe it's stuff that you're going to say, hey, this is what I think when I look out at the world. This is what I actually see. And the more truthful you are, the more people respond to that. But it also can be the subjects of what your truth is about can be really hurt by that. um for it can help people, but it can also really hurt people. And it's like, you really kind of get that core thing of like, you could destroy your own life. You could destroy the relationships with your own people while being a great writer, or being a good writer. Which is, you know, it's a there's a good core thing here of, of Harriet as a writer there. And in the end, he's like, the dad's still super happy, and he doesn't really realize what's going on. And it's just like, oh, we're going to go out for dinner. We're going to get a steak. It's like, hey, do you want to come too, Harriet? And Sport, who has gone off to his room, it's like, whirls back because he was going to get changed. It's like, no, she can't come. And she's like, no, I didn't want to come. It's like, I'm not coming. And like, she tears off. It's like, so yeah, that did not go well as well. And it ends, this chapter ends with her in her room, and she's crying and crying and crying for old Golly, old Golly, old Golly, her nanny, the one person she thinks maybe does understand her, the one that can make things better. um she's, it's one of these, like, she is maturing, but man, this is the thing that is super testing her at the moment, and sort of making her regress and be more and more like old Golly, old Golly. Is tough. It's really tough. It's a really good book. I'm really, really enjoying this. Really, really, really enjoying this book. Um, I probably haven't read it since I was a kid, and it always stuck with me. But it's interesting, like, how much, there's the core, this core section here is obviously, wow, I can see why this is the part that I remember. I didn't remember as much of what's happened, earlier, but it's all good stuff. But it's like, this is strangely, it's how much of I feel like kind of wisdom is in this book, of how much, a reflection of how I've lived my life is in this book, for good and for ill, is in this book, uh, um, of a kid, like, I was not. I very much hold any anger I have, I hold very much in. Harriet is just a razor, is prickly personality, while I'm much more Pinky Whitehead, get along, gross, little blob of a kid, and I've slowly kind of picked myself up. But it's uh yeah, it's just it's a book that I think, oh yeah, this is, wow, this really was a foundational book for me, really was. And I already made a little video about talking about how much orientation, or how much Harriet Harriet's way of living resonates with how I have lived my life, for good or for ill. All right, I'm going to leave it there. More videos later.